so welcome to the first episode of this weekly, or so we hope, guitar hang with my friend Nick Granville, all the way from Wellington. We're not too far apart in terms of distance compared to some of you that may be watching. We're both in the northern island of New Zealand. And Nick and I have been friends for a while. We love talking guitar, and we thought we'd do a regular thing. Nick's been going pretty hard out on his YouTube channel starting from this year. I'm pretty impressed, and it's a inspiration for me to get off my ass and do something on YouTube as well, which
Oh man.
leads us to what have you been up to this week, Nick?
Oh, thanks, man. Oh, that's very kind of you to say all that stuff about YouTube too, and all that. And likewise, my man, you're a really inspiring fellow. And if anybody knows about technology or gear, like you're the guy.
That's very
Always.
kind of you.
No, it's very true. What have I been up to? I just had a session today, actually, which is probably my first full proper one for the year, and it was this Latin track and a Tina Turner medley.
Oh, wow.
So about as different as you could get. And the Tina Turner medley was a real hard one because the reference track they sent was a live recording of the band playing it, and then they put a click on afterwards.
Right.
But I think the band must have been playing us some tracks because it was pretty close, but not quite. And then they're essentially re-recording all the parts to have a sort of a semi-band backing track, but some parts will be live as well. So they've got a guitar player on the show, but they want to have a second guitar, so I'm recording all the second parts.
Okay.
Yeah, and all that kind of stuff. So I'm basically just been putting parts down for that. And the Latin tune chart was the Latin one is pretty hardcore, like it's flamenco, which I can't really do at all. So yeah, but it's fun. I mean, all the lead lines are fine, and I've written out a chart for it, so it's you know.
Yeah.
And I had the weekend away, actually. We went up to Taupo with my family, and
Cool.
my sister-in-law's got a place up there, so went away, and so I took my guitar, but I think I played it for a maximum of 5 minutes all weekend.
Nice.
And then I came back straight into a really hardcore session playing some Latin stuff.
And
So
what did you use for the flamenco session?
I've got an Ibanez nylon string back there somewhere.
Uh-huh.
Maybe you can see it. Yeah, you can see it kind
Oh,
of
yeah.
hanging on the seat
Yep.
there.
Can.
I use that one a lot because it's got a pickup out of
Ah.
it. And I record the pickup, actually, and I use an acoustic IR on the pickup, and I also record a mic. I have I don't know if you can see this, but this is an AKG C451 vintage mic.
Those are nice. Small diaphragm
really great.
condenser.
Yeah, and I've got a pair of them, a matching pair from, I think they're from the 60s. It's a bit dented and what have you, but it sounds awesome. So I usually just point that at the 12th fret, and the combination of the two gives them lots of options to use. So
Do you ever pan them, or they're both panned mono?
I like panning them, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do, but I give them the option to do whatever they want.
Oh,
I don't record stereo despite having two mics. I find stereo, I'm finding more and more that stereo tends to just wash, whereas mono kind of has a very
Yep.
straight down the line. And also I found with engineers, they often don't know what to do with stereo.
Yeah.
Like if I recorded the acoustic guitar stereo, like two microphones on it, and then they pan them hard left and right,
Yep.
and then they make a decision partway through recording that they want the guitar on the left.
Yeah.
Where do they put the pans now? They get confused about that.
Yeah.
So
I think
I find it's
also,
easier just...
yeah, back in India, the engineers would prefer to just do mono, but they would often do a double track. So then they could
Exactly.
do a left right if they wanted it, or they could just
Yeah.
park the mono wherever in the mix. They would want
That's
it.
exactly it. So
Once-
all the rhythm parts I'll put in stereo. I'll do two tracks for exactly that.
Also, once you like send reverb on an aux, that mono thing automatically becomes stereo if you want it that way.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I need to check out one of those. They're pretty cool, eh? The other thing I've done is I got my basement over here. I got a new tube for it.
Oh, cool.
So I ordered a 571.
5751.
5751, that's
Yeah.
it.
Do you want a vintage one? I've got one lying. I can send that to you.
Oh, hell yeah.
It's an old G made in America.
This says hand graded selected. I got it because the guy who fixes my amps in Wellington, he said these are really, really good in terms of low noise and all that kind of stuff. And it arrived in a bubble wrap. And I thought, holy heck, how didn't it get broken? But they have these 3D printed cases that say New Zealand tubes on them.
Right.
So it can't crush. I was like, Genius.
It's awesome. You know what a 5751 does exactly? Like a 12EX7 or ECC83 has a gain of 100, a gain
Yep.
factor. And this one's got it of 70. So it's a little more chilled out, not as full on in the gain. So if you
Yep.
normally put it in the first valve stage of your amp, it kind of opens up the headroom a little bit. So you can actually turn the amp up a little bit where you're not, driving
That's
that
exactly
frontal.
right.
Yeah.
And I was looking at an AY7, I think it was as
12AY7,
well,
yeah.
which I think is about 25 or 30, like really clean.
Yeah.
But I went with this one just because that was what
Yeah.
Simon Gottlieb here in
It's
Wellington suggested. So yeah,
he's got a cool Facebook page, right? What's his Bogan Boutique or something?
Bogan Boutique. Yeah,
Yeah. I love watching his some of those this is the amp that's coming today and this is what I got to do to fix it, that sort of thing.
he's a super smart
Yeah.
guy. He really is. When Richard Fortus was here with Guns N' Roses,
Hmm.
Simon did repaired one of his amps.
Okay.
Apparently, Richard was only traveling with one amp,
Oh dear.
playing with Guns N' Roses, no backup. And I was like, what? So Simon fixed his amp. Anyway, what have you been up to, brother? What's been happening?
Me, I was actually lucky to do a really nice gig this weekend with my friend Kat Tonks. She had us play at this venue called Davy's Cottage. So it's like, down in Titirangi, which is quite close to the sea. Lovely venue, lots of, open now natural spaces. My daughter came along. Like, I think this is probably the first or second time she's come along to a gig. And she
Oh,
actually
how
enjoyed
cool.
herself because normally when she was much smaller, she'd get really hassled with the loud noise and everything. But now she's finally at an age where she can, And then at the end of the gig, she was really proud because a couple of people like complimented me on my playing, and she's like, "Oh, I felt so happy when they told me like my dad plays good guitar or something."
Oh, how cute. That's
Yeah,
really gorgeous, man. Those
yeah,
those are precious memories, right?
they are, yeah, for sure.
She'll remember that for
Yeah.
the rest of her life, and you will too. So,
For sure. So apart from that, I got a new cabinet that I found on Facebook. You remember the old Marshall 2061X heads, the 20-watt little
yes, I
mini
do.
heads? So they came with a 2
Yeah.
by 12 cabinet, which was a diagonal 2 by 12. So it's not as big as a 4 by 12. Obviously, it's around 25 inches wide. And I've got a whole bunch. I don't know if you can see these heads here. They are all starting with the Soldano 25 or 24 inches. So it's like the perfect cab to put one of these heads on. And it's pretty light. You can take it for a gig. Doesn't take up too much space on stage. As was a traditional, horizontal 2 by 12 with, slightly wider. And I don't know about Wellington, but in Auckland, some of the venues we play, like every little inch counts on stage, sometimes.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, man.
So that's like one of the few 2 by 12s that you can actually take. And the thing is also because of the angle, it's pointing up at you a little bit, so you can hear yourself a
Exactly.
bit better. It, funnily enough, comes with G12 H30 speakers, which are normally
Oh.
considered the Hendrix speaker, whatever. And whenever I've tried those speakers in the past, I never liked them. I found them a little too fizzy, but these sounded great. So I think it's a combination of the cabinet being nicely broken in, which is a bonus.
Yep.
And apparently, when they put those cabs out, they slightly age those speakers. I was reading something on some forum, as you do, about they specially aged them from the factory for this cab, so it had some a slightly different sound to a stock one. But whatever it is, I mean, it's a good sounding cab, so I'm not like in any hurry to swap speakers and try as you would normally be tempted to do. Now, I think at this point in my life, if it sounds good, I'm just going to leave it alone.
I'm totally like that now too. Although in saying that, I'm holding a guitar that I've heavily modified. I haven't played this guitar in a while, but I used it for the session today, so I put
Yeah,
some new strings on it. But yeah, those 212s, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because the normal 212s,
yeah,
both speakers being flat and straight panel,
hmm,
they tend to kick through your feet. But that 212 with the slant on the top, so it's pointing up,
yeah,
it's the ideal. You got one kicking out the front,
yeah,
one kicking to you. Yet they're light and portable,
yeah.
right? Because the days of carrying a 4x12 are pretty much gone, right? Are you going to do it? I'm not.
No.
Speaking of which, did you see that Laney have just come out with a 4x12
Uh-huh.
speaker that's designed for modelers? It's got a it's got an amp
Amp
inside
built
it,
it. Yeah.
2,600 watt amp, and I was like, who's gonna use it? But then a buddy of mine who's the Laney agent in New Zealand,
Mm-hmm.
he told me he'd had a request from Justin Derrico, from
Pink's band.
Pink's band.
Yeah.
She's playing in Auckland, and he wanted two of the 2x12
Mm-hmm.
cabinets
Yeah.
to do the Pink show with. So
Mm-hmm.
essentially, he's using a 4x10 cabinet with a fractal,
Yeah.
because I know I think he uses an Axe 3 or something. But now he'll just be able to get one cabinet, I guess. But other than him, I don't know who else is going to use one, right?
I'll tell you one really good use I can think of for either the 2x12s or the 4x12. So basically, like say you run your amp into one cab, which we would call your dry cab. Now, from the speaker output of the amp, you get these line out boxes which just pad down your speaker level to line level, and they've got like a level control. So then you run that into your effects, which are 100% wet, and you send those stereo outs back into those powered cabs.
Ah,
So they
interesting,
run as
yeah.
wet cabs.
Wet, dry, wet
So you do
cab.
your wet, dry, wet thing without needing three amps because those two cabs have already got, the amps built into them. So that's
Yeah,
a
interesting.
useful application. I thought about doing it a long time back when I saw those the vertical 2x12s. But then again, there's no roadies here.
Yeah, man, I've used those 212 Laneys a couple of times. They're heavy as heck. Do you know
Yeah.
what I use all the time? A little 1x8. It's what I used on New Year's Eve, and like even then it was like, oh no, I didn't actually. I used the Hot Rod Deluxe on New Year's Eve. They supplied a backline amp. I was gonna say that usually, but like even like the loudest gigs I use, I take this little 1x8 head rush. It's an interesting thing because with the modeler, like you think of a 12-inch speaker for a guitar amp,
Yep.
it needs that because it needs to produce the bass. But when it comes to modelers, like the bigger the speaker, the bigger the cabinet, the more boomy it gets.
Right.
Like this is 1x8, and it's huge sounding. Like I don't need anything more than that for my gigs anyway.
Yeah.
Once it gets to that point that you're getting too loud with that, then you're drowning out the drums anyway.
Yeah.
Like
Have
it's getting ridiculous.
Have you ever tried doing the split where you send the signal without the IR to the effects return of a tube amp, for example, and then
Yeah.
your main outs to front of house?
So that's what I did on New Year's Eve. They supplied a Hot Rod Deluxe.
Yep.
So I use output 1 and I send it to them to the front of house, and that's got the IRs on, and then I branch off before the cab and all
Yeah.
that stuff, and I go into the return, and that works quite well actually. And I've put an EQ just before the
Yeah.
Hot Rod, so I can EQ what I'm hearing, and it doesn't affect front of house.
Exactly. That's exactly what I did with the HX Stomp. The only thing is, instead of the hot rod, I've got this old Line 6 Spider valve, which they
yeah.
made in combination with Bogner. It's a really good sounding power amp, and it's got a vintage 30 birch ply cabinet. I picked it up for $300, and you can't argue with that. It does, need a little bit of an EQ, which is what I did with that. But it's got a presence knob, so you can use that to kind of overall, how much top end are you needing a little bit more cut. You can just turn it up from there. But
Yeah, that's the thing with all these speaker systems for the modelers that people are using
Yeah.
is they don't have EQ on them.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can EQ it on your modeler, but it's slow to do that. Like I just want if I go into a room and the room is like, say I have to put my amp in the corner of the room and it's boomy,
Yep.
just grab a bass control and turn down. I've been curious to try that Fender one. Did you see that? The one
I did, yeah. That came out
Yeah,
with the floorboard that they did.
Yeah, I did the floorboard. I'm not interested in, but it's everything I've heard of it. It sounds like ass, and people say, "Oh no, it's really great," and I'm like, "No, it's not." Have you
Yeah.
heard it? But the speaker looks really. It looks like a cab. It's got an EQ. It's got probably enough volume for what I need, and I thought it kind of could be a good solution for those sort of things.
Yeah. Which leads us nicely to the next point I had in mind. Can you believe everything about gear that you read or hear online?
Of course, everything you see online is true, right?
Yeah. I mean, and I know that, you can take a shitty piece of gear and make it sound good. There's
course.
ways to do that. And once you've got EQ post-processing, you can, do all sorts of, stuff with it. Point being, like, certain guys just have a good sound in their hands, which then
Yeah.
translates across, and
Yeah, totally.
and there are some
And
guys
the
that are playing like vintage Les Pauls through dumbles, and it's like I don't think it's supposed to be sounding like
exactly.
that.
And it does make a difference. I remember a friend of mine saying to me once that it's 80% in the fingers and 20% in the gear.
Yeah,
So he said, just spend some money and get good gear, and you've got the easy 20%.
yeah,
And I thought, well, that's kind of true, but the 80% also informs the 20% because
yeah,
it's like your touch is how you get it really. But yeah, I mean, I love gear and all that stuff. It's funny on the internet what you see though, what people say.
yeah,
They people and you know sometimes that these people haven't actually tried it for themselves,
yeah.
but they read it somewhere else and then they're just sharing what they
Yeah.
read
The
somewhere
funny
else.
thing is, like, most of these people reviewing gear have just got it. Like, they're
Yeah.
new to it. I'd like to see people review gear that they've been using for years and years. This is
Mm.
my old Fender or whatever. I've been, this is all the quirks and you showing things like that. I'd rather listen to a guy doing that, but unfortunately, that's not the way the market and YouTube works. Everything's now. What's the newest stuff? And it's
Yeah, it's
less
funny you
about.
say that because I've thought about doing a review of my FM9,
Mhm.
the Fractal, but I don't want to do it until I know how to use the thing.
Exactly.
And at the moment, I'm still like getting the grips to it. And the other thing I got this new too that just came through is this is an interesting concept. The Twin Peaks Ibanez wah wah.
Okay.
I'm not much of a wah wah person, but
Hmm.
this thing has two frequency spots. So like a wah wah has a sweep through. This has two frequency. The first one I got had a problem with the pot, so they sent it back and sent
Okay.
another one. But it just arrived. So, but again, I'll probably do a review on it. But I'm curious. I want to try it first. I want to see what it does. I don't
Yeah.
want to like you. I want to, is it gonna work? I'm not much of a wah wah person anyway. That's kind of something, everyone did in the '90s and 2000s and
Yeah.
all of that.
I mean,
But people still love it.
one thing I like doing with the wah is just like almost parking it in a very narrow range and just using that to, like, if you're playing in a certain thing to make certain notes jump out a bit more
Yeah,
rather than going waka chaka, that sort of thing. You know,
like Money for Nothing, right? The Money for
yeah.
Nothing riff with
Or
that
like,
slightly cocked one.
yeah, like Michael Schenker, for example. I always loved his guitar sound. There was a wah into a cranked Marshall.
Yeah, and then he'd just tweak it on
Yeah.
certain notes to make them sing a little bit, wasn't it? Yeah, it was really cool. Yeah, that's more how I'd use a wah wah for like a color or an
Yeah.
effect. Although I do have gigs on occasion, and they say, "Can you do the waka waka thing?" And I go, "Okay."
Yeah. I've had
But
I've been requested to do that a few times as well.
yeah, it's funny how people love it, right? Isn't? And it's probably one of the easiest things you can do,
Yeah.
and yet people just lose their mind over it. I remember one time we were out at TVNZ doing this program, and I did that one song. There was a disco song, and I played Wakatu Wakatu because
Mm.
that's what the MD wanted. And I remember that one of the hosts of the show come over and goes, "Wow, that was amazing. That was like wow, like mind blowing." And I'm like, "Thanks." And I was thinking to myself, "That's the dumbest thing I've ever played."
Yeah. Uh,
Hey,
I mean, there's also like something to be said about like an envelope follow or something, which does that, but more like as it reacts to your playing,
yeah,
just the envelope opens. Like this guy, Tom Misch, I think you may have heard of him.
yeah, I know Thomas. Yep,
Yeah, I mean, the way he uses it is like really tasteful. And
totally. Yeah. That's actually what I do with the Fractal. I have a setup, an auto wire setup, so it ramps
mhm,
by itself because I don't want to bring an extra pedal or whatever, and I just let the Fractal do it
yeah.
for the occasion that I need it, which which is far more often than I'd like. But I'm curious to try this pedal too, and you can choose where you want the
Right.
two resonances to be. Yeah, interesting kind of concept
Does it
because
go
with
between
wah
them?
wahs, yeah, and you can choose where and how and what frequencies.
Okay.
Because when you think about wah wah, right, it hasn't really changed since the 60s,
Yeah.
right? Crybaby or Vox
Hmm.
or McCoy Clyde wah, like those, that was pretty much it, and then they've stayed the same since, haven't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's minor tweaks, but
Yeah.
nothing really.
I think one of the nicer ones I had was this company called RMC, or the Real
Hmm.
McCoy. This guy called Jeffrey Tees, I think, is the guy who made it. It reacts really well with distortion because I think on the vintage vase, it was kind of very dependent upon what came after it. So
Mm-hmm.
he put like a buffer, I think, after that, which kind of bumps up the level a bit. Because all the vintage
Ah,
wahs will drop your signal a bit the moment you engage it.
yeah, exactly.
So this guy's kind of given it so you can actually get a bit of a volume boost when you hit that. It's almost like then you can, crank the frequency. So my main studio was is still that RMC. And I found this old vintage one called it's made by Maxon in the 70s in Japan called the Crying Baby Machine or something, some ridiculous name like that. But that is a super light wah. Like the casing is like not like a ton of bricks. You can just pick it up with one hand like that. And you can almost do that, and it sounds great. It's more like vintage or something. So that's probably the one I take live if I have to, because I hate
Mm-hmm.
like suddenly your pedal train gets like 3 kilos heavier the moment you put the wah in it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. Well, that I mean, and I got to be honest, I'm pretty lazy with that too. Like that's why I have an auto wire in my fractal because I just don't
Yeah,
want to carry one more pedal,
yeah.
and it's so easy. But yeah, it's funny, isn't it? How the trends kind of changed like that. That was a real moment in time where wow, wow was a thing, and then now it's kind of other than the way Slash uses one that gets used quite a bit still
Yeah.
now. The kind of rock guitar thing.
Which were like
Yeah,
the
interesting.
the the big war tracks for you when you started playing guitar? Do you remember?
Oh, good question.
Like
I
I can
remember
tell you
the
mine.
Shaft. The
Like
Shaft theme was one of
yeah,
them that I remember. Like that was one of the ones where I heard that.
yeah.
And a lot of those kind of TV programs like that. Was it The Professionals? I remember hearing that.
Hmm.
A bunch of those British kind of programs that had of that era. Of course, Slash using it. Kirk Hammett from Metallica when he
Hmm.
used Wow Wow. I quite liked that too. Um, yeah, the Soul Guys. A Wow Wow Watson.
Yep.
You know, been awesome.
Mine was probably Voodoo Child. I was like, what the hell is that song? That
Oh yeah,
sound? I need to get one of those. The guitar solo on Civil War by Guns N' Roses. That wow wow
yeah.
wow. That one was huge. And Thin Lizzy, Brian
Oh,
Robertson. There was a solo called "Don't Believe a Word," where he just comes in with the wah going, he just like swells it in as he is trilling a note, and it's really effective. Like it hits out, and so that's kind of what made me want to go out and find a wah pedal.
yeah, I remember doing a recording session once, and that it was for this documentary, and they wanted me to play Wah Wah, but they wanted me to play it like as like really fast, like going wah, 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 like this crazy kind of sound.
Yeah,
And I was like, man, I can't move my foot that fast. So
right.
the guy, the composer, jumped down on the floor and grabbed the Wah Wah pedal from
Uh-huh.
either end and went whoa, 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 while I played the part. It was
Yeah,
bloody funny. It came out sounding great,
yeah,
but I could never ever do it again. Like
right.
he had to do it with his hands to be able to get that
That
sound.
flutter kind of thing. I mean, you
Yeah.
can hear that on what's that Clapton on Tales of Brave Ulysses by Cream. I think that was his first usage of the wah. And
That's right.
Hendrix's was the burning of the midnight lamp. If you remember that one,
No, no.
that's a great wah riff. But then I think he used it on White Room as well, which is like the quintessential,
Oh yeah, of
pow.
course, yeah.
Most of the people kind of figure, oh, that's a useful way of using it at the time. Anyway, so is there any cool amp model, for example, on the Fractal that you like would gravitate to for like a rock guitar sound, for example?
Yeah, I'm really enjoying the Marshall JTM 45.
Okay.
And it's funny when I first started playing. I remember the first time I tried a Marshall, I absolutely hated it, and and I wish someone had told me how to use it properly because
Yeah.
I plugged in, I turned it to kind of bedroom level, and then I played, and I thought this just sounds thin and nasty, and it sounds nothing like those rock records that I loved,
Hmm.
you know. And I wish someone had told me you've got to crank it, you know. And so I kind of have always been a Fender guy, because Fenders, even down low, they have a sweet, clean sound. You know what I mean?
Right.
To me, the ideal place for a Marshall is right on the edge of breakup.
Right.
Where it's just pushing. So I've been using the JTM 45 a lot in the Fractal and really enjoying that. I'd like to have a real one here,
Hmm.
or even Plexi or JCM8. Maybe a JCM 800 might be a bit too gained up for me,
Yeah.
but I like the JTM 45, and I often just use that, and then I just dial the volume back on the guitar. But I've also been playing around with the Morgan AC20 in here,
Hmm.
I've been following this guy John Cordy. I don't know if you know of
Yeah, John Nathan Cody. Yeah.
Jonathan Cordy. Yeah, British guy. Really good player. And an interesting thing, he was one of the people who kind of inspired me to do YouTube every day,
Mm-hmm.
because he pretty much posts every day. And he said the reason he did was when his daughter was born, he was like, I'm just not going to get time to play guitar unless I do something like this, you know. So his whole thing of post, that's why he does those clips at the beginning of a playing example. You know, it's his chance to play for
Yeah.
him.
Yeah.
Because I remember what it's like when you have young kids, and you'll know this as well. It gets hard to find time, you know. And so for me, that's kind of why I started getting into doing YouTube more regularly, you know, as a means to playing more and doing that. But yeah, he did one on the AC20, the Morgan AC20, and I really like that sound. It's great. And I've never really been into Vox amps. You know, I find them the bright jangly thing just yeah. But in the modeler, I like it.
Yeah. For me, I remember when I had the whole Line 6 pod, and I would go through, like, all the different, and just keep going through them. And the ones that stood out to me were the JCM 800 and the Soldano SLO.
Mm,
And it's funny thing, the first good amp I then got was a JCM 800, so I was able to, like, compare it. But I never really um, could afford a Soldano at that time or even get it, in India. And then I think sometime around just before my daughter was born, I remember I had a tour in the States, and I was like, right, if I don't get it now, I'm never going to get one.
mm.
So the funny thing is, I bought it from this guy who was selling one used, and he had to get it sent to the first gig that we were on. And I didn't get my visa in time, so I had to miss the first gig. So I had to fly straight in for the second gig in San Francisco. But this guy had already shipped it to the first gig, which was in Houston. So the band guys
Oh,
had to collect it from, like, the Walgreens or wherever that mail pickup thing is, and then
mm-hmm.
fly with it to San Francisco. The first thing I remember, getting off, like, I think after more than 24 hours of flying, landing at the hotel, I was like, where is it?
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I
ripping,
have to have it.
yeah, ripping open the box, and I took it to sound check, and it sounded, like I imagined it would sound. And the
Mm,
funny thing is, like with the Soldano, most people concentrate on that overdrive channel, but that crunch channel, which is basically the clean channel with the gain up,
that's the one.
is a great sound. It sounds like a very civilized plexi, for lack of a better term.
I'd agree.
So,
Yeah.
like, you if you turn the guitar volume up all the way, that amount of distortion, but if you turn it down, which is like that edge of breakup thing that you're talking about,
Yeah.
and I think it's just got the right amount of mids to cut through as a solo voice without sounding
Mm,
harsh, or without sounding, like sometimes Marshalls have all those weird top end frequencies that very likely were EQ'd, either with Pultex or the console EQ and stuff like that. I'm willing to
exactly.
bet that they must have, shelved off some of the harsher frequencies, or even, like, once it went onto tape, the tape itself would smooth that out. This thing is all
Exactly.
already kind of like EQ'd and processed in a very pleasing way, so you don't really have to mess with it too much. And
That's
then,
what I find interesting with the fractal is
yep.
you can do that. You can have that level of control,
Hmm.
right? And you probably have that. I don't know if you have. Do you have that with the HX Stomp where? And this is something probably we should discuss as well. Is
Yeah.
like with modelers, a lot of times people think, are they an amp in a room? And
Hmm.
they're not meant to be. They're meant to be sound like an amp in a room
That's
with a
mic'd.
microphone in front of it. So I think that's why I like the JTM 45 so much in here is I've got a high cut that cuts a lot of those shrilly highs off, you know.
Hmm.
Which you're right. I think those old recordings that's what they did, or the tape at least cut those highs off.
Yep.
And yet with digital recording now, all that high end is preserved,
Yep.
and you don't necessarily want it. Not
Yep.
on a Marshall, you
Yep.
know. And I wish when I was starting that I'd kind of figured that out about Marshalls that you got to dime them to get them, and you know, there's a certain thing. And like a SM57 on a Marshall, right,
Hmm.
is that sound. It's just
Yeah.
powerful.
I think of most of the amps that I've played, the Marshalls are probably the most dependent on the speaker cab. So
Right.
if you've got, like, a slightly warmer speaker, like a Greenback or a G1265, for example, then that automatically does that roll off as well. And then you've
Gotcha.
got some more modern speakers, like the stock Marshalls come with the 75-watt Celestians, and
Mm-hmm.
those can get, especially the newer ones, because I had a cab with the old British ones and they were a bit nicer. But they can get a little, bright. So especially if you're doing a rental and there's a Marshall cab, you got to be, you're going to have to know which frequencies you can push and which need to be, And
Yeah,
sometimes I'll
exactly.
set the amp a bit bright, but then I'll pull it back from my guitar. Like, for example, my humbucker is down, the tone knob's down to like 4. And there's still plenty of, if it was up all the way, it would be. You see that the high mid nasal
Mm.
thing comes back in. So what I do normally with my tone control is just turn it up to where it goes ooh wah, and I just leave it there. Can you hear that?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so that's around 4,
Right.
just about 4. And then I put that. I think I told you what I did. I did a coil tap, but it's only half the coil that's getting tapped. So you do
That's
that.
right. Yeah.
So this is with that switch in now. So it's a bit more single coil like. And then you go back to the humbucker for like the more fuller mid range, which is just kind of useful. But it's amazing that the amp can actually take all that and still make it sound good. So you never really
Yeah.
feel like you're fighting it, which is
Mm.
I mean, sometimes you want to fight. There are certain times you'd want that, but this is like when you just want to just rip and let it all come out nicely. Then you don't want to have be fighting the amp.
The best amps I've found, though, they inspire you to play, though,
Yeah.
right? I remember the first time I tried a Soldano, and it was a guy in Wellington called Dave Berry, and he used to run a music shop here. And I'd bought a PV Classic 50. Do you remember those? The old
I do. The tweed style ones, yeah.
tweed PVs,
Yep.
which were probably the best amp PV ever made, I think. Maybe a 5150 if you're into that sort of
Yeah.
thing. But those amps actually sounded pretty good. And I remember I took it back to Dave because it was having an issue. So he took it back under warranty, and he said, "Well, you're a gigging musician." He goes, "Take my Soldano." It was a 212 and he goes, it's in a flight case, so you can't break it. So it was a 212, and I remember the first gig I did, and he said, "You'll be quite shocked when you play it to start with." And it was quite shocking just how clear and articulate it was.
Yeah.
Had this punch, but it had this clarity thing about it that I remember just going, "Whoa!" Especially compared to the PV, which was kind of sounded like this a lot. It really didn't sound that great,
Yeah.
but. And I think short after that, I got my first Victoria, which was that Bassman.
Right.
And then it was really like the blanket had been lifted off the top of the amp because, and it's inspiring when you play through an amp like that, as you know, like the Marshalls, the Soldanos, the Fenders, these sort of things. When you play through a really great amp, everything feels that much easier.
Yeah. And you
It's like,
and you don't
it's
even feel
inspiring.
like you need pedals to,
No, exactly.
yeah. It's just guitar.
Although maybe a bit of reverb, because
Yeah.
do your amps have reverb on them? Because mine doesn't. And
Well,
neither of my amps do.
I've got a lexicon in the rack, so I'm kind of
Mm.
just doing that after. So what I'm doing actually with this amp, for those who are wondering, the amp goes into a reactive load, and from there I'm running it into that UAD aux stomp pedal. And
Hmm.
I used to have an aux maybe 5 or 6 years ago, but I always found, like, especially like the Marshalls, it it never really felt like I was playing through a real cab. And then later on, I found out it's to do with the way UA implemented a reactive load, and then Sirs kind of followed exactly like what a greenback cab makes the amp behave like, a 4x12 greenback cab. That's what he based his on. So I always found that
Interesting.
that felt more like playing through an actual cab. But then the aux speaker and room modeling is really amazing. So then running
Right.
the SAR into that, you get the best of both worlds. It feels like,
Mm.
a cab, and then this kind of sounds like tonally. Like, and I mean, I've used IRs and stuff in the past, but the thing with IRs is you kind of have to, like, almost like find them out of a pool of 3 million options, which
Yeah.
then gives me option anxiety. Oh, is that one better? Or is that one? And this is more like, you just turn the knobs to where it kind of sounds good. Okay,
Mm.
they have fewer cabs, but I think they've got all the, like your 4x10 bassman is in there. Your Champ or your Princeton or all the basic food groups are covered, so you're not really left wanting unless you're after some esoteric stuff. But the room thing makes a huge difference because because
Oh yeah.
I use the aux, I realized how much of my favorite guitar sounds have rooms blended into them. You can actually
Yep.
hear the guitar in there. And that gives it so much depth without having to use reverb or delay to get that, you know, guitar sitting in the mix. Because I don't know if you've just put a 57 on a cab, and then you can't really use that sound in a recording without doing something to it to make it sit ambiently in the mix.
Exactly.
Some
Yeah.
level of dimension has to be present. So either you'll double track it, or you use a delay to spread it out, or a reverb or a room or whatever. Having said that, if I just take the reverb off, the lexicon reverb off, this is just the hang on one sec, I need to, yep. So you can kind of hear the room in there, and also gives you a slight stereo image as well. You can ban it mono, but then in this case it's a stereo room thing. So
Yep.
that's pretty much what I'm doing to record, all these amps, or even the two that you can't see in the frame at the moment. For me, it's like it feels like it should, and then you're not like getting the cops called because you've got speaker cabs running. I mean, in an
Yeah.
ideal
Exactly.
world, you'd have a room, soundproof room, and you can put 5 or 6 speaker cabs, have them mic'd up all the time, and then you pick and choose like Tim Pierce would do, for
Like Tim
example.
Pierce. Yeah, I was going to say like Tim's really got the ideal setup,
Yeah.
but I mean, who can do that? Most people can't. You know what I mean? And so that's the thing, and that's why I've been using the fractal more and more, because I find that like an amp on 2 is just uninspiring. Like
Yeah.
regardless of what the amp is, and most of the time I can't. I can't even. I do this for my living, and I can't play that loud even on a gig with it, on a big stage or whatever. You've still got people moaning about the volume and what have you. So I find a lot of times the model is, but your setup's ideal because you don't have to make any noise with it, right?
Yeah.
You can be on headphones and have it like essentially silent recording, but it's an amp that's really given it, it's the tubes are working, right?
Yeah, true.
I struggled with the sound quite a bit for trying to get the sound in the fractal, and I was like trying all these different amps, and I was like going, oh, what would it sound like if I used a Friedman, and what would it sound like if I used a Dumble, and I just hated the sound, and I was just like, I couldn't get what I wanted. And then I thought, what do I use in the real world? Well, that
Yeah.
plus a BB preamp or a dude pedal, one of the two. And so I just dialed up a Fender amp, BB preamp in front of it, and that's that mid-range heavy thing with a little bit of delay. And I was like,
Yeah.
And I think that happens a lot of times with modelers. People get into this overload of, like you were talking earlier about IRs. People get into this thing of going, oh, there's all this list of IRs, and
Yeah.
how do I choose one? You get option overload,
Yeah.
Whereas, so just being simple with it, I find, is best. It's like with that Soldano you had, where you had a sound, and then like the amp's kind of doing its thing, but all your stuff is coming from your controls on the guitar.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
the power.
Check it out. So, like, the funny thing is, there was this one session for a Bollywood track, which then became like hugely famous and everything. But they told me it was going to be a big rock track, and I said, okay, great, the Soldano is going to be the perfect amp. So I took that and everything. And as a session kept morphing, the director kept changing the brief. So it then finally became like it needs to be like a funk guitar track. And here I am with, the old Soldano, and it sounded fine. So all I did was like, just turn the guitar volume down, and it was maybe even less with the volume like on 3 or 4. it got the job done, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I couldn't tell you how many times that's happened to me. Hey, I remember doing a session one time, and the guy said, "Oh, we want a Jeff Beck type fill,"
Uh-huh.
and he played this song. Basically, in other words, I was composing the piece for him because
Yeah.
he had like two chords, and I was coming up with improvising a melody, right?
Yeah.
But I played every Jeff Beck type thing I could think of,
Uh-huh.
and he was like, "Nope, nope, that's not it. Nope, nope, that's not it." So then I played like. I think I remember it was the Brian Edwards show, and I went.
Yeah.
I played that lick, and it was like stock blues.
Yeah.
And he went, "That's it. That's the one." And I was like, "Ah." Oh. And then I've had it so many times where I've had that. You know, they'll say, "Oh yeah, we want a heavy metal thing," and you come in and they really want classic rock, or well, not even that. You know, it just changes into something else. So you got to kind of be versatile and make it. You can make it work, right?
Yeah. And
I mean, you've got a Soldano and a Strat. You should be able to make.
Yeah.
You should be able to play just about anything with it.
pretty much. I mean, I've done an entire gig just plugged straight into it and just maybe had a bit of reverb and delay on a second amp. And I find those type of gigs almost like they free you up, where you're not like
Yeah.
having to step on a bunch of switches, and you know, you just play guitar, and then whatever you need to do, you just adjust it from you. I mean, there are times and places for like the whole, you know, elaborate rig thing, where you know, you need like a bunch of different sounds that you have to switch between quickly, in which case something like the Axe or a Helix would actually be a perfect solution if you don't have the budget for, you know, Bob Bradshaw to wire you a rack with the actual
But even
stuff.
then, there's things you can do in these modelers that you can't do in real life.
Yeah.
Like, I saw this thing of Guthrie Govan's using one now, and he said there's one of his songs where he fades between one amp and one setup,
Yeah.
and he fades to another amp, and he was like, there was no way he could really do it. So he set it up on the modeler that when he brings the expression pedal back and goes through, and it fades, you know. And there's things like that you can just do that you would be really impossible in the real world, you know.
Yeah.
But then, you know, but it's funny, isn't it, that people think, you know, oh, you have to be a modeler guy, you have to be an amp guy. Why can't we just play both?
Exactly.
Use whatever works, you know. Like I use the modeler a lot. I've got the amp there. I'll use the amp if it's the right thing. Like if I was doing a jazz recording, I'm not like, you know, and I was playing acoustic jazz. I'm not going to take this guitar and the fractal.
Yeah.
I'm going to take the bassman and I'm going to take an arch top, and I'm going to, you know, be set to low level. It'll be mic'd in a nice room, and that's a certain thing.
It's like saying like if you like Chinese food, you can't like Italian or something like that, you know.
Exactly. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions around the modelers too, like we were saying before about, you know, people say, does it sound like an amp in the room? But
Yeah.
I don't think these things are meant to, and I think that, again, they're just another tool. You know, Joe Satriani apparently on his latest album used plugins on a couple of tracks, you know, and I'm like, because he was like, well, it got the sound he wanted, so just use it.
Yeah.
And I'm all for that, you know, use whatever gets the job done.
Pretty much.
Just do it.
Yeah. And there's also like, you know, just finding the right application for a sound. Like there's no such thing as a bad tone, just like a bad application for that particular sound.
Yeah.
Like today at the shop, we were like testing this little practice amp that comes as a kit with one of the guitars, and it's like a, you know, I don't know how much it probably costs, like $20 or $30 to, or even less to make, right? But if you turn it up all the way and like turn the tone knob down on the guitar, there was this really cool thing it was doing. It almost had this overtone and everything. It's like I could find a use for that, you know.
Oh, totally. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm all for that, like, you know, having your different things and all geared. Like, I mean, I don't know if you can see it over there, but in that stand just there, I've got a $200 Squire Strat that I bought. And I bought it for two purposes. One is if anyone's in town and they say, oh, can I borrow a guitar?
Here you go.
Sure, take it. It costs me $200. It doesn't matter if you break it. Or if someone comes for a lesson and they're traveling and I go, okay, here's a guitar that you can use, and you have to use any of my good ones, you know.
Yeah.
Because it's fine. It plays fine. But one thing it does is that position too, you know, where you're bridge and middle. Because it's got really bright, quacky pickups. So when you
Right.
put it in that position, it does that better than any other guitar I've ever heard, like, period. So I keep it for that one thing. You know what I mean? The sort of Prince type guitar sound sometimes, you know.
Yeah. You know, the funny thing is a lot of people chase vintage guitar tones And to me, a lot of it is it's the sound of loss, you know? Like you're always after, oh, this cable's got the best spec, and this,
Mm.
very spec driven these days. I guess because it's like a product of the whole tech world, that
And
bleeds
the
on to,
internet, you can
yeah,
look up the specs on the
on,
internet.
yeah, exactly. But there's something to be said for just getting your hands on a piece of gear and just making it work without
Yeah,
necessarily, you know uh having to know about every last detail about it, and also kind of embracing the slight shittiness sometimes that happens with a piece of gear. Like like those old coily cables, for example, that Hendrix would use, would take off so much of that top end, which
yeah.
then made the Strat and the Marshall work fine. If he was
Mm.
using like the latest evidence cable or whatever, you know I don't think it would sound, it would probably take your ear off, for example. So
Yeah, I remember hearing a thing. Sorry to interrupt. I
yeah,
remember hearing a thing of Rich Scholl talking about that, saying, "Oh, you have to have all your pedals true bypass or
yeah,
something." And I thought Jimi Hendrix went all true bypass,
yeah.
just whatever works.
Especially I think even the wah pedals, the old Vox things, they weren't true bypass. So the bypass switch bleeds a whole bunch of top end off, and the
Yeah,
moment you
definitely.
true bypass the wah, it it changes that. So
Yeah, totally.
it's like sometimes you just want to leave a little bit of that shittiness in. And even with regards to like volume and tone controls, like flicking everything on 10, like I've had so many people pick up my guitar at sound check and want to try it out, and the first thing they do is crank, crank, crank. I'm like, nah, that you've just like ruined it. Don't do that.
Yeah, yeah,
Set it back to where it was, and now listen to it. And if you need more, it's always there, but don't
yeah,
default to that. Everything on full. At least for me, because then having more on tap makes it, like if you roll your volume down and it gets a bit darker, then you turn the tone knob up. You always
yeah.
have a little bit more, left to go. It's like,
I think a lot of times people don't have a concept. Like what you're talking about there is your concept of riding the volume control and the tone control and all
mhm,
this stuff and pickup selectors, as a concept of tone.
yeah,
And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck with modelers. They haven't heard a really good amp. And
exactly.
so therefore are they ever going to find one in a modeler? They're not.
Yeah,
What I mean, whereas I've got a Victoria Bassman there. It doesn't get any better than that. Like those are way better than the Fender
yeah,
Bassmans. I mean, maybe like an old Bassman would be about on par,
hmm,
but I mean the guy who makes those. He's got the original machine that Fender used to wind the transformers from back
right,
in the 50s. Like he's obsessive about getting every detail exactly like the originals. So I know what a Bassman sounds like.
yeah,
You know what I mean? And it's funny how many different things I hear, like plugins and what have you, and they say this is the Bassman sound, and I'm like, nah, not even close.
yeah,
Because the other thing with the Bassman too that a lot of companies forget, and a lot of people, the fractal's pretty close,
hmm,
but I think it runs at 2 ohms,
right,
and so that it's punchy as heck because of that 2 ohm. It's got 4 speakers off a single amp,
hmm,
and it's very different from my deluxe. I've got a Tweed Deluxe
yeah,
Victoria as well, and the deluxe is like saggy, and it's got way more bottom end, and it's not got nearly as much punch.
hmm.
But it's really fun running them together too.
The funny thing is, I remember even Derek Trucks, he's a big Super Reverb fan, and he said one of the things that I like about the Super Reverb is it's only 2 ohms, so it feels
Yeah,
a bit more immediate or whatever. And the funny thing is the Bella, if you find most amps with a variable impedance selector, they'll be 4, 8, and 16. This
mm.
one does 2, 4, and 8.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so if you can run a 2 ohm cabinet, you can set the amp to do that, which
And it probably sounds amazing on
yeah,
2 ohm too.
yeah, I'll try it sometime. I haven't really got. I mean, you can rewire, I think, an 8 ohm 4 by 12 to be 2 ohms.
Yes,
Yeah,
you need 4 speakers
four
though to
four
do
eight
it.
ohm speakers. Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. So then it comes down to two ohm load in parallel.
Can you
Anyway,
do that with your reactive load?
no, the reactive load is fixed at 8 ohm.
It's fixed
Yeah,
at 8 ohms. Okay,
yeah.
I thought as
I
much.
I think a couple of people have requested them to make 4 and 16 ohm loads, but I think they'll probably make that first before they do a 2 ohm load, for example.
Right.
Yeah. You know,
Cool, man.
the interesting thing is maybe like in 10 years you'll have reactive loads that are switchable, that do the variable impedance curves, like, oh yeah, now I want a 1 by 12, or that sort of thing. Then you can match that to the cab that you're modeling, and it'll actually, that sort of thing. But having said that, I think we are in a age where it's amazing because you can get a free plugin like that neural amp modeler thing I was telling you about, and
Yeah.
it legit sounds and feels really good. It cleans up, like a real amp. And the only thing is you have to sift through the profiles and see which one works for you. And like you said, if you have an idea of what it's actually supposed to sound like, you're a lot more uh, likely to stumble upon a digital representation that'll work for you.
Yeah, man, I had real problems getting that going. I tried again a month ago, and I thought maybe I should Skype you and see,
We'll do that
or
sometime.
FaceTime you and see if you could talk me through it, because
Yeah.
I couldn't get it to go like it was either the second or third time. I remember the first time I got it, I don't know why it wouldn't work on my system. It was really frustrating. But then I got the S Gear plugin about the same time, which
Hmm.
is one a really good one as well, and that plugin works really great for a lot of guitar stuff. But I find a lot of times with plugins, it's using your computer processing and all that kind of stuff, and I like having it kind of on hardware so that my computer's just for recording and plugins and all that
Yeah,
kind of stuff that's in there. You know what I mean already?
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
which is why I like having the real amps and not like dedicating processing power to that.
Mm.
But like late at night, sometimes it's a bit warm. You don't want to put cube amps on because then it gets warmer still. Then
Yeah.
that's when I use the plugin and just maybe play around with amps that I don't really have, like say a Mesa Mark II C plus or something like that.
Mm.
And you'll find really good captures if you just spend the time to sift through. But yeah, I'll totally be keen to help you set it up at some point. The good news is
That'd be
there's
great.
there's a company in Europe, I think, that's making a hardware device that can host those profiles, and the latency is
Wow.
super low, like 0.4 milliseconds, which I think is like, I haven't like seen a digital device with that low latency yet.
Mm.
So it's looking exciting for new gear coming out in 2024. But
I know it's a great time to be a guitar player,
it
isn't it?
is,
Really,
yeah.
when you think about it, like all this stuff is available, it's all around, and people ask me all the time, like, what amp should I get? And I'm like, well, what's your situation? They're like, oh, I play at home, I've got kids, I live in an apartment, and
Hmm.
whatever, and I'm like, just get a plug-in,
Yeah,
whichever one does it for you, and just plug your guitar in. And
yeah,
they're like, say, oh, I've got a budget of $1,000, and I'm like, spend $999 on the guitar
yeah, pretty
and get a
much.
plug-in.
Yeah, and a good interface. The quality of the
Yeah,
DI will make the plugin sound a little better.
and
So
some good headphones
yeah, or monitors, studio
or
monitors.
monitors.
Yeah, and also I think if you go to YouTube, you find a lot of isolated guitar tracks, which can be a good
Yeah,
reference, especially if you don't have access to the real things. Just kind of listening to what a good recorded guitar sounds like in isolation, because sometimes the illusion is that it's much bigger than it actually is. But when you go and listen to it in isolation, it's like all the low end is
totally.
being lopped off and things. So then when you're playing those sounds, it may not necessarily be the most pleasing or satisfying. But then once you record it, you're able to maybe just EQ it a little bit to fit in, and
Yeah, there's a YouTube channel like that called Digital Split that I've been checking out a lot, and whoever does it is isolating guitar. But some of them are AI, but most of them he tries to find stems and
yeah,
post them up. And I found it really fascinating. Like you said, there's not a lot of bottom end in some of those tracks that you think it is,
yeah,
because it's coming from the bass guitar that's
yeah,
filling out the low notes, and the guitar is really mid range and top.
yeah.
It's really interesting. I remember that Sir Duke one. Was it
Hmm.
Sir Duke that we did? And guitar's way more distorted than I thought.
Yeah.
And Le Freak, that Noel Rogers thing.
Yeah.
It's actually not like that at all. That's how I always thought it was.
Uh-huh.
And then I heard that the Oops, I hit my switch.
Yeah.
But it's actually like that. It's like almost breakup sound when you hear it isolated.
Yeah.
And yet once it's blended in the track, the sparkle of the top end comes through, and that's the bit you hear.
Right.
So you think that it's clean, but it's actually like it's pretty edgy, and it was really fascinating.
Yeah.
going through all these old guitar parts, and there's a lot of rock stuff in there, and there's a lot of songs that I'm not a fan of, but you kind of go and listen to them anyway, and yeah, I love that stuff. It's great.
Today I was listening to Something guitar solo, the Beatles song. I always thought it was like a warm, clean Les Paul sound, but there's a little bit of grit. You can hear it like bark on certain notes. And then this one phrase, where he goes, that lick over there, right after that, he plays it like this. It's so weird, right? Yeah, he's playing over a G major, but he's hitting the minor third. Oh.
Yeah.
I don't know if he did it by mistake or whatever, and they just left it in, but it sounds super cool, right? That sort of thing. And you never even like realize all these little nuances because they get swallowed up or whatever by the whole track. But then if you like, it's a fascinating thing. Like there's a bunch of Hendrix stuff I came across on, man. Like just listening to his rhythm guitar playing is such a
badass,
treat.
eh?
Yeah, man.
Yeah, there was one I heard like that the other day too. That on that Digital Split channel was Sex Machine, James Brown.
Yeah.
Right. I've been playing that song since I was like 15 years old, and I've been playing it wrong. Right? It goes. That's what I thought, right? I thought it was. Oh, I'll give that a bit more kick.
Yeah.
It's not. I listened to it, and the isolated guitar part, and it's actually got this low note going.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah.
You don't hear the low note because it's kind of blended in with the bass and everything else going on, but it affects how you groove when you play
exactly.
it.
I just think.
But here I was playing it wrong for all these years,
It's got so much more bounce when you do that. Those
yeah, totally.
Things. Yeah.
Like the classic Enter Sandman that everyone played wrong. You know that one, right?
Sure, it's the correct way.
Everybody goes. Everybody goes.
Yeah.
But it's actually not that at all. You got to play it with your fourth finger and your second finger.
All right. So it sounds a lot smoother that way.
Well, the G note rings, and that's the keynote thing to it. That note's got to ring the whole way through.
Right.
And it sounds different if you try to go. Open string doesn't sound right. And there's this guy showed this YouTube video, and he found all these videos of James Hetfield and close up on his hand, and sure enough, that's how he plays it. That specific fingering to get that G note to ring through.
That's awesome.
And I was like, man, I had it wrong for all those years.
And another one I had wrong was Whole Lotta Love, where you normally go. So apparently he goes and he bends that D note up a quarter tone. It's so weird. And apparently the bass does that as well, so you get the slight rub at that point, which is super cool.
It's a bit of mongrel, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like gives it the mongrel in it because it's not clean, is it?
Yeah.
It's like it's that, like you said, a bit of rub on it.
It's I think it's like a life's lesson, knowing when to leave the shit in and when to take it out.
Yeah. And that's the problem now, right? You must find this when you do sessions, right? But everything's edited to death, man. Where it's not human anymore, and it's like it just drives me nuts. I was talking to someone about that in the weekend, and they just said that they didn't like Beyonce because they said she sounds like auto tuning, and I said they all sound like auto tuning now. She put on Rihanna afterwards, and I was like, this sounds like auto-tuning too, right? It doesn't sound like... nobody sings like that. It's very bizarre, But it's become about perfection. I mean, I know someone who auto-tunes every note of his guitar on his records to get it perfect, and I'm like, what? It sounds so unnatural,
Yeah.
And these Instagram guitar players, you probably see them too, and they go and they post these videos and they try and pretend that they're playing live, but they've edited the shit out of it, and they've spent a week in Logic like tightening it up, and they can't play that way. There's no way they could do it live, and yet they're trying to pull the wool over people's eyes, and I just go, come on guys, like, it doesn't sound good to me. But people fall. I even remember seeing Rick Beato fall for one of them recently. He said, "Oh, your playing's on fire," and left
Mm,
fire emojis
mm,
next to this guy's one. And I was like, man, that dude's just like edited the heck out of it.
yeah.
You could tell. And he played it slower, and he'd sped it up to get it to. And I was just like, oh man, come on, Rick, you're smarter than that.
The funny thing is there'll be a bunch of kids watching that and thinking that it's normal, and then they'll end up, actually learning how to play that way, which is
Yeah,
like it's becoming like the humans are emulating the machines rather than the other way around. Like
which can
this,
be a cool thing,
yeah,
right?
the singer's trying to sing like with the autotune artifacts. Like I've heard people do that. I was like, did you use auto? Like, no, that's how they sing, and it's like, but why did you bend the note? That's how they do it because
Yeah,
they were just
Jojo Mayer, right? Have you heard Jojo Mayer, the
yeah,
drummer? You know, he essentially tries to play like a drum machine,
yeah.
like drum and bass stuff, but on a drum kit. So he had to learn how to play like super even and super precise, like
Uh-huh.
interesting kind of concept. Yeah.
And what about like if a producer asks you to play like a MIDI guitar? Can you make it
Oh, okay.
sound like? That's I
I'll
have
be
to say
like
though, like
taxi.
yeah, that's like one of the worst like digital sounds that you as a guitar player you can
Oh,
use.
I
Like
know.
when the keyboards are trying to sound like you. I mean, there's guys who do it well. Like even that solo on I Want to Break Free, where everyone thought it was like Brian May, but it was the keyboard player Fred
Mm,
Mandel who did that. That's cool. I don't mind that, but it's like normally these little cheesy things. And sometimes people send it to me as like a reference on a session,
mm.
and then you say, "Oh, just use it as a guide and then replace it." So most of the time, like that entire song, I'll be doing like say 80% sample replacement, and then the last 20% they're like, "Okay, if there's anything else you want to try on it." I was like, "Well,
But that's weird though, isn't it? Because once they've put a MIDI track in there
yeah."
and they're saying this is it, they
Uh,
become attached to that, don't they?
They do. And sometimes the voicings, which they play with 10 fingers on a keyboard, I have to like maybe do three passes to kind of, simulate that that
Yeah,
voicing.
it's bizarre, isn't it? I have the same problem, and it drives me nuts. It's like, yeah, that's the
Yeah.
world we live in.
Yeah. Or they'll pull in something from Splice. And sometimes, they do stuff which makes the guitar part sound like very robotic or whatever. I'm like, that
Hmm.
sounds cool. Just leave it. You don't have to, have me
Yeah.
sound like a robot. Just use that. And they're like, oh, okay, cool. You can do that. At least, they don't expect you to, just because they're getting you to play guitar, replace, everything. Or like sometimes those acoustic strumming guitar beds that they get from like one of those VST virtual guitarists or something like that. In the mix, who's going to tell, if I've actually gone and, replaced it? It's going to be so
Yeah.
soft over there. It sounds fine by itself. It's like if it's going to be upfront, then yeah, I'm going to want to redo it, that sort of
I've
thing.
done that before. I remember I did a record with this clarinet player, bassoon, saxophone player, and it was his record, and it was an orchestra,
Yeah.
and he recorded an orchestra, and the orchestra stuffed it up. It was really bad,
Mm-hmm.
like it was a student orchestra, and they weren't up to the task. So he came to me, and we essentially re-recorded everything. But what we did with strings was I recorded a string quartet, so 4 strings, and then I used MIDI to kind of fill it out underneath, and it sounded great,
Yeah.
you know. And so it can work as long as it's not the feature thing right in the front, it's in the background. And yeah,
Yeah. There
just
was
use whatever.
Yeah, I mean, there have been times like where I needed a baritone guitar part, and I knew that baritone thing on the Mellotron would sound exactly like what it needs to be. So I just
I'll
gone
show
ahead
you
and
this.
yeah,
Where are we? Um,
ah, yeah,
that's the virtual capo,
yeah.
they call it in the fractal.
It's a polyphonic
And
pitch shifter, right?
yeah, and it works. I mean, there's a little bit of latency, but
Mm-hmm.
I've used that like way more than I ever thought I was ever going to use it.
Yeah,
Because someone will write something and then it'll be like 4 notes too low. I hit that and I play those 4 notes
yeah,
and boom, it's done. Or they want a spaghetti western type sound. Because I don't have a baritone guitar. It's the one thing I don't have.
mm-hmm.
But now I've got one that's kind of passable,
You know
and
what you
it
can
works.
do is if you find like a cheap Strat, put a set of 13 to 56 and tune it down to, I think it'll go
Yeah.
all the way till C sharp or C without, flaking out. Won't really do the B thing. But yeah, if you
I've
just,
done that on the SCO guitar
oh
back
yeah.
there. Has got 12s on it at the moment. I've got it in E flat.
Hmm.
Right, but that will go down to D or C sharp without really getting too. But even then, that's bringing another guitar to the gig for
Yeah,
one song.
true. Then you kind of want that Fender VG one, which they did. It has like a whole bunch of tunings, and
Oh yeah.
yeah, that's a useful one. But then, if should anything ever happen to the electronics or the battery dies, then like okay,
Game over.
pretty much.
The Line 6 Variacs, do you remember those?
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
always been tempted to buy one just for like the sake of having it, and it has like those sitar sounds and stuff, which can be useful. But like I can't bring myself to buy something that's already obsolete.
Yeah. I used one when we did Dancing with the Stars. There was banjo on one song, and I was like, I don't have a banjo, and so they got a Line 6 Variax, and I played it on that. And it was okay. It didn't sound great, but got the job done, so.
Well, if you ever need a six-string banjo, I've got one in the cupboard somewhere. I can.
I've actually got one now,
Yeah.
and I had one on loan for like years, and then I felt guilty, so I went and bought one, and I actually get a few gigs playing banjo,
Yeah.
6-string banjo. I played a Frank Zappa thing with the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra,
Awesome.
and that was actually written for 6-string banjo guitar, and then they'll do like Duke Ellington type things or something, and they want banjo in there, so. And because they don't want that for the whole gig, they want it for one or two tunes. That's why they call me, because I'll play electric for the rest.
Have you got anything cool coming up next week?
Next week I've got a gig this Friday. I don't know what it's going to be like, so I don't know if it's going to be cool. It could be, it might not be. What have I got next week? I'm trying to think. I've got a couple of gigs coming up. Actually, I just got a call last night from the Lady Killers.
Okay.
You probably know that.
Yep.
You probably know those girls up in Auckland, Jackie and Tina.
Yep.
So I got a gig with them in March in Napier, which should be fun.
Nice.
And then Cuba Duper, that's just been locked in. So I'm playing Cuba Duper, and I'm playing the Tauranga Jazz Festival.
Nice.
Bringing the trio up with Dan and D and Mike.
Cool.
The trio we played
Yeah,
in. So we're doing 2 gigs with that band at Tauranga this year. For finally, I haven't played there for years. So there's some stuff coming up. We've got a couple of blues club gigs. You've played the blues club in Wellington, you know what that's like.
Yep.
So I'm playing there this Friday, and then the following Friday I'm doing, next week I'm playing at Hashigozaki, which is a little club in Wellington. I play with my double drummer group. So I've got Jacob Randall, and I've got Darren Mathiasen, and I've got Leo playing keys. So organ, guitar, or keys, guitar, and 2 drum kits.
Awesome. So we'll catch up again next week, and we'll see how those went.
Yeah,
you can fill
absolutely.
us in on those. I've just got one on the Friday coming up with Kat again, but this will be a trio with just her, myself, and this guy Rod, who plays bass, but he's got a kick drum as well. So it's
where are you
quite,
playing?
this place called Crown Range Lounge in Parnell, which is like a small little, slightly bigger than a cafe. But it's always been a good venue or crowd that maybe most of the time rather they like to listen to the music. So that gives us room to like do a lot of improvisation in the middle, even like playing,
Yeah,
your
because
usual
they're listening.
blues and rock and stuff like that. But you just take off in the middle, and sometimes like these, guitar solos, suddenly you're like, oh, it's actually going somewhere right now. It's like pleasantly surprising. So
So what amp are you going to take for that?
that's probably again going to be the spider valve and the
And
HX the HX Stomp, because there's no PA for the guitar to go through. It's like a small enough room
Right.
you can just turn the amp up to where you need it, and then the vocals and the her guitar will go through the PA, and then the bassist has got his bass amp, and I think he puts the kick into that as well. So it's
Cool.
quite useful. So yeah, let's catch up next week, and we'll see how that goes. And if you've got any questions for
Absolutely.
Nick and me in the meantime, you can flick those through in the comments. Let us know if you want us to talk about anything in particular, or we'll just go on meandering as we do.
I enjoy this though, man.
Yeah, man.
It's pretty cool, and I got to say that we've been talking about this for a while, but it's really nice that it gives us an excuse to catch up with
Yeah,
you and to talk guitar and unashamedly talk guitar.
yeah,
Because sometimes when you're hanging like with on a gig or whatever, and nobody wants to talk about music, but
exactly. And
that's the whole
I
point.
think our poor families, they deserve a break from all the guitar talk as well. So we'll keep it to
Exactly.
ourselves. Awesome, lovely talking to you, man.
All
Catch you
right,
soon.
likewise, man.